Mr. Cortez.
Hello.
How are you?
Good morning. Doing well.
Good. So last week, we set a goal of making sure that you name your laps during aggressive monitoring. And I saw that you did that. Nicely done.
Thank you.
How do you think that naming those laps impacted the quality of your students' work?
I believe both the students and I could finally figure out where our shortcomings might be in the different parts of the process, because math is filled with so much method.
Right.
A lot of the times the kids will just say, I don't get this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll have to delve down and figure out which part don't you get.
Right.
Do you understand
Exactly.
this part? Do you understand this part? With laps, it defines every part
The steps.
to where we can go ahead and skip
Yeah.
out. I know you know this part. I know you know this second part. Okay, it is this third part that we need to get through. So it does streamline, or it makes it a whole lot more efficient as to what they do or do not understand.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So today I just want to dive into just being a little bit more intentional with specific practices when it comes to our aggressive monitoring. So can you just kind of tell me, like, what are some of the key components of aggressive monitoring, and like what's its purpose?
Aggressive monitoring is, the purpose is for me to use the aggressive monitoring is to break down our processes into steps to see where their actual progress is
Right.
at different parts of their method.
Mm-hmm.
Algebra 2, which is what I teach, there are multiple steps to
Right.
their methods for pretty much everything we do now. So I get to actually, the process or the necessity of it is for me to actually see where our shortcomings are, if the deficiencies are actually in the Algebra 1 part, which is actually one of the steps for my actual lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Is there Algebra 1 fine?
Right.
Usually that is the shortcoming.
So if you can, in connecting with that, if you recall, like from our PD with the instructional coach, like what are some things that we have to put on the papers, and like what does she want us to kind of do, make sure we're doing during that process?
On the students' paper, we want to make sure they have clear markings and definition as to what each mark means. For example, check means that you're on the right track. Question mark means I need you to expand on a particular step, or
Mm-hmm.
X means you're often on the wrong track and
Right.
you need to go ahead and check your resources again.
Very good.
I do have that laid out on my
I
on
see
my
that.
board for them,
Impressive.
for them to remember
Refer
what
back
each
to,
one.
cool.
On my end, I am supposed to actually write the same markings as to their progress on
Right,
each lab.
right. So tracking that, we're going to talk
Right.
about that today. And doing that tracking will also help you make like informed instructional decisions later. So you can look at like, these kids got the check marks, they're good, but these question mark kids, I might want to pull them, in a small group. So we'll talk about that more today. So in the lesson that I came in and observed, what was your primary objective for that lesson?
Our primary objective was to actually solve inverses, specifically on exponential and logarithm functions. Up until this point, we have been working on domain and range of exponential and logarithm functions, what they mean, what the base means in each of them. And now we're actually switching out between exponential and logarithm
Right.
functions to solve, as always, to solve for y and to solve for x, but essentially just to find the inverse of each one.
Very good. So I remember you said in the first lab you were looking for switching out like the X's and the Y's. Can you show me like on that exemplar like what that first step is? Like what does that look like?
Well, simply, if, for example, number 1, y equals 4 to the x over 5, step 1 really is switching out the actual letter, y for x and x for y. So, whereas in the original I have y equals 4 to the x over 5, that I'm looking for x equals 4 to the y over 5. So really it is just a matter of switching out letters. As simple as that step could be, it's necessary, and in math, a lot of times kids like to skip steps, thinking they can just breeze through it.
Right.
They make a lot of mistakes when they skip a step, like that very first step.
And then looking at just kind of overall, we don't have to dive into all of it, but looking at some of the student work that you submitted or turned in to me, did you feel like they could do that first step pretty well?
I figured they could do that first step well, and they could find success in lap 1. So yeah,
And that's always
And
a
I
good
got
thing.
this.
Like I
I've
got this
this.
first bit.
I can do
Right,
this.
exactly. All right, very cool. So in being more intentional with our tracking, like we talked about, and we're gonna also talk about like creating an intentional map of where students are in the room based on data.
Okay.
So we can know like which students to go to first, and hitting our lower students, but we'll dive into that process. But I wanna look at an exemplar model of it first.
Okay.
So this is a video of a teacher doing aggressive monitoring. And in this video, we're gonna talk about afterwards, like what do you notice about how she tracked data, how she looked at students' work, all those things. So I think I have it on the right spot.
Now that I'm seeing people getting to the outline, I'm coming around checking your thesis statement. Don't forget to put quotes in the titles of the articles, but then you got it.
Okay, so we're not gonna watch a lot of it. So what did you notice her doing?
I noticed she announced what she'll be looking for. I noticed that when she marked the first student, that she also told them quickly and succinctly what she was looking for. And don't forget to put quotes in the first
Right.
first statement. And then she moved on.
Yeah, very good. And so just like touching on like what you said earlier, how it affects your practice, do you think it affects her practice in the same way, even though it's an English course, like it's still the same impact on student quality of student work?
Yes, I do believe it's the same. But yeah, if we have, when we're going into the differences,
Yeah.
we can talk about that. Is that now?
Yes, we are going to talk about like some of the things that she was doing in comparison to like your video.
Okay.
Let's look at your video. Get it to the right space. So this is just like at the points where you were naming your first lap and then going around to look at student work. I think
Okay.
Let's see. I had the timestamp. Here you go.
There we go.
All I'm looking for is you switch out your X's and your Y's. That's it.
Oh, I did.
That's all.
I did like to know what I was
You
looking
did.
for. Look at that.
That's correct so far. Boom, boom, boom.
I love it.
Little trouble on the next system. I'll help let me get everybody with number 2. Make sure you got your lap 1, and then I'm gonna help everybody out with number 2. Alright. Lap 1's are good.
awesome. So looking at the exemplar and you're looking at yourself in that process, like what did you see, some of the differences, the gaps between this exemplar and what you just did? What was a missing piece?
I think what I should see, or what I need to work on, is in Lab 1, a lot of students are already in Lab 2. They're already on the next part. Sure, I wanted them to do a certain step for each of the problems. So step 1, switch out your X's and Y's. Do that for the whole front of the page.
Yeah.
Now, I do have advanced students enough to get that done and then go on and move on to the second one. So I think half my class at that time were already on a misunderstanding for each step 2, or possibly even step 3. Now that I'm trying to recall what number 2 looked like.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, a lot of them were on to step 3.
Right.
And
But you remember, like, you just want to focus on that first
That's
lap.
right.
We're going to want to
That's
get
right.
ahead of ourselves and
that's
but
And
focus on that first lap and being intentional with every student. Was there anything else? What's that missing piece that you're not doing?
I didn't track on my own
Tracking
board
on your own.
where they were at. I will say, I guess, yes. Yes, for lap 1, it was almost a, well, if you can't switch out your X's and your Y's.
Right.
But it was also everybody's got this, almost a scratch down on if I had my clipboard in front
and
of
then
me.
you'll be
it
able to
would've been just a
remember
quick
the next
physical
day
easy.
who
Correct.
had it and who didn't.
Correct.
Absolutely. And so even with the student work, I noticed, that you didn't.
Right.
Code is with fidelity, everyone. So we want to make sure that we hit everyone. Very good. So based on what we talked about today, and like looking at the exemplar and then looking at your video, what do you think your action steps should be to be more like the exemplar and add in those missing pieces?
Well, the proactive, I would need to actually make the charts with the check boxes. Again, I will have to actually mark their paper as to what I'm looking for. So those are the easy, real action pieces to put together my own tracking, my own chart, and actually writing on their paper.
And I want to show you one. This is from an English class, but it could certainly be used in a math course. You can see how she's already got all her students' names typed in, so you can just print this out like weekly, and then you could just add in your notes for lap 1, any content, specific things. There's room to like put her laps on there, put any trends in the data, and then once it's collected, like you can look at like this student question mark, like you always have question marks. So we probably need to pull you in a small group, okay? Or if you notice that everybody doesn't have it, like maybe you need to do an in the moment, like reteaching.
Sure.
That type of stuff. So it's there for you to like look at and make informed decisions about your instruction.
Okay.
And I also wanted to point out to you like the seating chart, like map, like I feel like we need to be more intentional with where students are placed so you'll know where to hit. And I know this is a small class, but you can position your high students in a certain place where you know you can get to them first because they probably got that first lap. But you're probably gonna have to spend a little bit more time walking and getting to those lower students to give them a little bit more feedback. So for this teacher, this is based on her common assessment data.
Okay.
So the green is like good to go green, like you were in the 80s, right?
Right.
And then the yellow, the bubble kids, like the 70s. This is a pretty high class. But then like my red, okay, are kids that scored below. So you can see her route of how she's hitting those high and then going around.
Gotcha.
See how it's different in here? She's going this way first, then coming around her bubble, all these babies in the front with the exception of her. And she also has this like a mark for other things too. Like this is a star. It shows like these are her LEP students.
Okay.
So you can make it however, however you want, but just to be intentional about, okay, I'm putting my kids here. So I know they probably got it, but I know these babies probably don't.
Gotcha.
Right? So just being more intentional with that piece. All right. So we have some like good steps
All right.
in place. So you said making the chart, like naming, you're always gonna name your laps, you're already good at that.
Okay. Actually marking their paper.
Actually marking their paper
Student's paper.
with the codes,
Okay.
and then collecting your data on the tracker
Intentional seating.
with intentional seating.
Okay.
Now, do you like that idea of using it based off of common assessment data, or are you thinking about some other source of data to be able to do that?
No, it would be either common assessment or my own test because we only have the ACPs. So.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would just be, for example, my last 6 weeks test.
Very good.
I'd just use that.
Cool. So you got it written down. So tell me the steps one more time. So make sure we're straight.
I need to go ahead and make charts for my laps and for my tracking charts. Marking the student's paper with the code. Intentional seating and figuring out how that would work out with my laps and with the time spent with students. And I believe that's all of them, right?
Yep. Very good. So now we're gonna like script out this process of like what that looks like, even in like what you're doing, okay, in that process. So you're standing, you're naming the lab, you're doing this, you have a good job, if they have the W and got something missing, but make it authentic to you,
Sure.
right? The Cortez.
Like
way.
boom, boom, boom.
The Cortez way. Very
Sure.
good. So let's set our timer for 3 minutes, and I'm going to script along with you, and then we'll kind of spar and compare what we came up with. Now, if you get done early, let me know, because I'm just wrapping up.
And this is just for step 1, or is this for all of my
Just step
labs?
one.
Okay.
Well, it's your steps that you're doing within your lab.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay. good. I'm ready.
Awesome. Okay. So let's compare our plans. Okay, so what do you say for yours?
Not much different than what I said in my original. All right, for this first lap, I'm checking for the step of changing out your X's and Y's. Complete that step for the front page before moving on to the other steps.
Very good.
So they'll go through each problem. They're expected to go through each problem and only do the first step. There
Right.
are more steps, but yeah, just knock out the first one.
And so what are your actions going to be? I do have that also in my plan. Not using the Cortez words, but
Right.
from my understanding. And then so when you're marking and you see like if it's right, like what are you going to say?
I'll start my route and then mine is succinct. So it's just correct, keep going.
Yeah.
Correct, keep going. At this step, specifically for this lesson and for me,
Right.
you've either missed the step or skipped the step. Again, I would take great pause if they
Right.
can't switch or they can't do this step.
So you're actually going to name it there. Are you going to tell them like you need to fix
Right.
this? Okay, cool.
So you've missed or skipped this
Right.
step, and that's really that's the short of it. You've
And
missed
if
or skipped
they
this
don't
step.
have it,
And if
what
they
you going to
don't,
say?
oh, you're missing. Go ahead and write it.
Where's your word? If
No.
they don't have it at all.
If they don't have it at all, it's a bunch of X's. Go back.
Yeah, yeah.
Go back and fix this step. It's missing. That's actually going to be, there's a time when that's going to be points off because we do, during tests, we do
Right.
check the method part.
Very good.
So, yes.
So after you made your complete lap, is there a moment where you just gotta kind of pause and look at the data you collected and make any type of decisions, or would that be something that you would wait to decide? So for instance, if there were a bunch of question marks, would you decide, okay, let me pull a small group real quick in the
Right.
moment, or would you make that decision later?
Specifically for step one, I would actually have to make that decision later and
Okay.
just rethink life in general. It is
No,
literally switching
no.
that. But the action step that I have for myself is to only look at step one.
Okay.
Like my students, they're going to be going on to step 2 and step 3.
Right.
It's on me to make sure that I'm only
Only
looking at
looking
step
at
1
step
and
one.
moving on. Because yes, I will want to, and they will want help on step
Right.
2 and 3, or more likely 3, because step 2 is almost very doable
Right.
as well. So it is my personal action step to just
Awesome.
look at step 1 and move on.
And then can we add like
Mhm.
the piece where you intentionally make a decision whether you're gonna decide now or later what
Okay.
interventions you're gonna do,
All right.
and make that note on your tracker.
It'll have to be later. That's
Yeah.
Give me a pause.
Doing an observation and feedback.